Welcome to the Explore Words, Discover Worlds podcast from Bradford Literature Festival. In this episode, join our panel as they ask, what does freedom of expression mean in 2025? From hate speech and identity politics to digital censorship and protest bans, the boundaries of free speech are more contested than ever. Recorded live at the 2025 festival, this episode explores the forces shaping public debate today, the line between speech and harm, the influence of tech platforms, and how power and privilege shape who gets heard.
Hi everyone, how you doing? I'm Peg Alexander. I'm proud woman with one foot in Leeds, one foot in Bradford, but I spend a lot of my time over here, work in various guises around here. I'm a broadcaster and a journalist, and I've worked in Bradford for many, many years in different guises. The Lit Fest always one of my highlights of the year, and I'm also, as well as being a interviewer, and you might see me on telly sometimes or listen to me on the radio, I'm also hopefully can have my first book out later this year. So maybe one day in the future I'll be sitting in a panel place at the Literature Festival. So over the next hour, we're going to tackle, I think, what might be one of the many defining issues of our time. What exactly does freedom of expression mean in 2025? We're going to go from hate speech to identity politics, digital citizenship to protest bans. Talk about that question, are our freedoms under threat? And who gets to decide what can and can't be said? And how do we safeguard that expression, that freedom, whilst building a fairer, more inclusive society? So unfortunately, one of our speakers isn't with us this morning, but we have two fantastic speakers who are going to help us unpick all of this. So if I could start with you, Tasneem, there to introduce you. Tasneem is literally just yesterday come in from Australia, haven't you?
Gosh.
Yeah, which is really quite amazing. You're here all week.
Physically here all week.
Okay, you're physically here all week. And you've only had 4 hours sleep, haven't you? Yeah, so we will be very kind and gentle with you, Tasneem.
I'm ready.
So you're a cross-cultural consultant, a keynote speaker, writer, a champion of diversity, equity and inclusion. You've got a lot of academic credentials. And you were also appointed inaugural ambassador for women of colour in Australia and, as you were saying, awarded your medal in 2020. We are so honoured to have you here. Thank you very much for coming all this way, being part of Bradford Lit Fest. And we also have Bernan Somnes, who's with us. Now, you've not come quite as far today, have you? 3 hours up the road from Cambridge. Yeah.
You cannot compare with Tasneem's place.
But you've still made the journey to Bradford. And I hope I'm not sharing any confidences, but you're dead impressed with Bradford City Centre, aren't you? Yeah, we love
Seriously,
that.
yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, which always goes down well. We love it. We love it when anyone comes to Bradford and loves Bradford, because we all love it too. You're the author of 6 novels. You're also an academic at the University of Cambridge, and your novels have been translated into 48 languages. You've received many international prizes as well. Born in Turkey, you worked as a lawyer in Istanbul before coming to Britain for political reasons and living here in exile for several years. So now you live between Cambridge and Istanbul. And you're also the president of PEN International, which celebrates literature and expression of freedom. I mean, it's going to be an interesting conversation as well, because you write in Kurdish as well, don't you? Yeah, and I know we'll get onto that much more, but obviously you have a take which very much around the fact that often languages that are not heard a lot, and the voices of people aren't heard, and whether that's an act of rebellion, I think, is one of the things we're going to talk about. So let's get going straight away. If I can kick off, and I don't know which of you wants to take this first, either of you, but this question, is free speech really under threat more now than it ever always has been, or is it just that it's playing out differently because the channels by which we're having this debate is different? Okay, Berhan, over to you.
Thank you very much. It's a wonderful day, wonderful city, wonderful building, wonderful people. And unfortunately, it's not a wonderful time to live in this world. You know, so many horrible things happening at the same time in different corners of the world. In the recent past, when I was younger, we would say, oh, there are some problems. When you look at the map, the global map, you say, okay, there's a fire here, there's a fire. But when you look at the same map now, you see all around, burning, you see smoke, you see people scared. I remember my travels to United States about 10 years ago. You go for book presentations, you talk. People would always ask you questions. I'm giving an example of the United States. Ask questions about the dark political environment in my country or in the Middle East, in South Asia. In last couple of years, last week I was in New York again, all questions were about America. What are we going to do? Can you imagine there is no safe place left anywhere? Go to Italy, go to Hungary, go to Sweden. So many countries, when we look at Europe, okay, let's say the developed part of the world, you see that ultra right-wing parties, populist politics in power, they are not speaking the language of equality and freedom and living in harmony together. They are using the language of hatred, demonizing others always, blaming someone for something. So in this world, we need something different, okay? I will maybe give some examples using some literary pieces. In the past, maybe the threat was direct and easy for us to identify. What I mean is this. For example, you are a writer. A government would like to stop you, to threaten you, to punish you. They censor you, or they arrest you, or they murder you. Okay? All these things were described in a wonderful book we know, 1984, by George Orwell. And that book's story based on the tools of the governments used through violence. But then there's another book written just before that, Brave New World by Aldous Huxley. When we see that book, there's no use of violence, nothing like that. Everything is being done by people themselves, voluntarily, with pleasure. Now, when we look at the current situation in this world, look at the social media, the loss of privacy or surveillance system, hate speech. And now we see new ways of threatening freedom of expression across the world. And it's not only coming through governments or certain authorities, people, groups within society carrying the same horrible work with the disguise of freedom to silence others. Now we have a different situation. It's different situation 50 years ago, and today we have a new threat. So every time, because I'm active in PAN International, the worldwide organization of writers actively working for freedom of expression, in every decade we say that let's describe and define the new challenges. Now, in the last 10 years, we've all been talking about this hate speech, this social media usage and privacy loss, and now artificial intelligence. How are we going to handle these problems? We already started to call them problem, not opportunity. 10 years ago, we would say, oh, great opportunity for everyone. But now, people are feared, scared. This is a new question, and we need to talk to address this matter.
Yeah, just that question about, is free speech and the right of expression really under threat more now than it ever has been? Or is it just that the channels we've got have allowed that debate to kind of come through, but there's no more restrictions on us at the moment?
So the freedom of speech is, yes, there is a much greater cost. There is a much greater contention of what we can and cannot say, to the extent that, well, maybe even 15, 20 years ago, critiquing government in a democratic institution was considered part of democracy. Now it's actually considered heresy. And that's in Western domains. Whether we're looking at the US, I say even to some extent in the UK, with the cancelling of and the questioning and the political suppression of free speech through protests and movements. again, with historically, protests are what shifted civil rights and global conversations of movement, whether it was on, abolition, on slavery, on equality, on ending apartheid, and of course now issues like Gaza. That is what the public were able to do in 2025. That just the idea of taking to the street to protest your democratic right now has very severe consequences. So the consequences of free speech, which we once upon a time endured unquestioningly under the sort of the banner of democracy, has become contentious. It's a very scary time to know that even freedom of thought has been politicized and weaponized. So there's a lot to unpack with such a big question.
Absolutely. Well, let me just, to start the further conversation going then, let's just pick up on that question that you were talking about there about, I mean, I think you said that institutions that previously were viewed under the lens of democracy and now viewed as heresy. Unpack that a bit for me. Tell me more about that whole question about how people are viewing democratic institutions or viewing democracy.
Well, a fundamental right in a democracy is to question your government. But now if you question government, you're put on a watch list. So just for context, I was supposed to visit the US about 3 months ago. I had a conference, I had a keynote to present at a company in Chicago. Literally the night before I left, I had my children begging me not to go because they were worried that I'd be stopped and screened at immigration. And I said, like I'd get stopped. And they all laughed. They're like, of course you'll get stopped. Look at you. You're going to get stopped. And I said, well, it can't be that bad. And we did a cursory search of people going into the US from the West, Canada, Scotland, and New Zealand. And I'll just, for context sakes, they were white people. And they were getting stopped because of searches being made on their social media where they'd been critical of Trump and or at that point Israel. And they were questioned at the border and they weren't even deported. They were detained in El Salvador without due process. And this is like 24 hours before I'm catching my flight to the US. Needless to say, I had a panic attack and a slight medical situation erupted and I ended up having to cancel my trip because I literally couldn't get on a plane because I was so unwell. And I tell this story only because I can't imagine in my lifetime that as someone with an Australian passport, I would be unable to safely travel to Western country. It just would not have seemed, that doesn't happen in a democracy. That happens in, repressive states. That happens in fascist countries where they question your right to think. If you can't question your government, if you can't question the policies that are being made about you or about people in your country, then how does that reflect any sense of genuine democratic right and inclusion? To me, it's been protecting the hierarchy and protecting the hegemony as opposed to protecting everybody. So it's not inclusive government, it's exclusive governance.
And you were smiling there, Berhan, because obviously you come from Turkey, which is kind of a different situation as well. And as I was saying in the introduction, you kind of felt like you were living in exile.
About 50, 60 years ago in Turkey, in main political area, there was a phrase, and the Conservative Party in Turkey claimed that they were going to make Turkey Little America. That means a prosperous, great country. In the Middle East, a Little America. But now we see that America becomes a big Turkey. And the whole world now is going to be like Turkey or Russia or any other country. Just imagine. It is not a joke anymore. Maybe it would be a joke 20 years ago, but now it's a reality. And for me, it's easy, to understand or to go through it, because I was born with that. I feel immune. But in countries like America or in UK, now look, right-wing party coming up now here. And you can't imagine what kind of country we are going to see here in 5 years' time. There is an American writer, Sinclair Lewis, the first Nobel laureate, American novelist. He wrote a wonderful novel in 1935. Before Second World War started, before everyone hated Hitler, he wrote a novel called It Can't Happen Here. And the story was about someone like Trump, imitating Hitler and taking power through elections and create all hell, and then resistance started. Okay, that's the whole story in 1935. Now look how many years passed, 80 years later, Now we see that it can happen even in United States, in United Kingdom, in Germany, in France, everywhere. So this is a warning coming from a writer, an academic, a journalist. So we should ask questions to ourselves. There is no need to describe what's going to happen. The question is this: I'm a citizen, I'm not a politician. What should I do? What should you do? The job is on our shoulder. If the government is failing, if institutions failing, then it's in our hand. That's the big question. That was the question writers asked themselves in 1921, 104 years ago. And then in London, they decided to form an independent writers' organization. Now we call it PEN International, the world's oldest international human rights organization. So they asked the question and they found an answer for it. They said, okay, we set up this, and what is our aim? First, a few years they were struggling, mainly focusing on promoting literature. But after 5-6 years, they said, that's not enough. Writers are struggling everywhere, even in 1920s, because it was just after the First World War. They said, okay, let's put freedom of expression on top of our agenda. And since then, we've been fighting for freedom of expression. In 1930s, we had a couple of international cases, like Arthur Koestler, arrested in Spain during the Spanish Civil War, and then came other names. Every decade, we had 3, 4, 5, 10 names internationally. But now, in this year, we have more than 300 international names we worked on as cases. Unbelievable. Unbelievable. So this is the question to myself and to what are we going to do? How are we going to warn governments, politicians, parliaments, institutions? When I go back home, I'm going to speak with my wife, with my children about the situation that they are going to face tomorrow.
What can we do, Tasneem, on that? Because I'm really, I'll be honest, I'm sitting here kind of holding back tears, kind of, it's stupid to say this because I know all this stuff intellectually, but we had a conversation earlier when we were just having a coffee, which really kind of shocked me. And I think, and you telling that story has just added to that, where you said to me, Berhan, you said, you ask dangerous questions. And I said to you something like, obviously, I sit here with the privilege of being someone who's lived all my life in Britain, thinking that it's okay to ask those questions. And then as I'm walking over, I'm thinking, is it okay anymore here to ask these? And you're saying there as an Australian citizen that you wasn't able to get on the plane to go to another democracy. Sorry, that's very depressing, isn't it?
Confidently, not confidently. I mean, it's a shifting playing field at the moment. So, like historically, I would have travelled anywhere without question, especially from a Western nation to a Western nation. But I think that has changed. I think the safety around conversations which we need to have has become literally a career-defining move in many ways. So if you do speak out, and again, not to make it personal, but it's impossible not to get personal when the professional implications of suppression of free speech does hit hard. And I know from my own personal experience that in December of 2023, I retweeted comments by then, I think it was Mehdi Hassan or Alexis Sale on my Twitter account, for example, which was screenshot shared to my employers, to colleagues, to say that I have a very strong, and people by just retweeting, and I should say the content of those tweets was in relation to critiquing what was occurring in Gaza at the time, which was at that point emerging as a genocide. And just on account of retweeting other people's concerns for what was under any other circumstance, that if it had been Rwanda or Burma or Yemen, would not have attracted the same amount of rank opposition and strategic silencing. I was questioned, I was investigated, I had to be pulled off boards and committees, and while I was further investigated, all on account of simply speaking my mind. In not even my mind, rather retweeting someone else's mind at that. And again, it made me question not just, oh wow, freedom of speech has been affected, but who is actually, and this is a topic that I'm sure Burhan can add to as well, we talk about controlling the public narrative. We sort of joke about it, oh, well, whoever controls the media is going to control what happens in town. But it's like the link between media and political leadership and the impact that has on citizenry has reached a point where it is literally life-changing and is impacting livelihoods. And to some extent, as what we're seeing in the US, with people being taken up off the streets and incarcerated sometimes indefinitely, this is happening in democracies. And so it's a very frightening situation.
The thing that when I look at it, what's happening in America, though, we know, we've seen the film of people being taken on the streets. We've heard stories like yours. We're hearing this stuff, and there's a part of me that goes, how the hell is that still happening in a democracy when we actually have access to this information?
Because freedom of speech is freedom as long as it's speech that they want to hear. And it's about like I said, it's about protecting a certain hierarchy that has now been seen to be the only acceptable norm. It's the only acceptable narrative. Whereas we used to have much more room for broader thinking. It was a table, it was a broad table, a broad church, if you like, even of thoughts and ideas. But due to so many different reasons, which maybe I'll get Rehan to speak to, it's become a very elite table. And if you're not on the table, you're on the menu, right? And that's pretty much where we're at.
Yeah. You mentioned early, I said, ask me dangerous things, please. What is dangerous also disputable? I'd like to give a couple of examples about it. Because especially when I go to Turkey, journalists, they come, they say, shall we ask you some sensitive questions? If I don't speak freely, if I don't criticize government without fear, how can ordinary citizens can do this? If we stop talking, if journalists stop talking, academics stop talking, how can public then speak about their problems? We are not talking about certain, let's say, dangerous words. Okay, a German radio station based in Istanbul, during a live interview, they asked me, can you call your president dictator? I was in Istanbul. If I say yes, likely that they are going to arrest me. If I say no, who are going to call a dictator dictator? I said yes. I call him dictator. Now, this is obvious. Okay, dictator is a dangerous word. Okay, can we say that a certain political party now rising in UK or in Germany, they are fascist? Can we call them? Okay, these are too much political terms. What about the term peace or ceasefire? 7 years ago, Turkish army went into northern Syria to murder Kurds, because northern Syria occupied by Kurdish villages. They went, and in Turkey, a few intellectuals, we published a statement, very short. We said, we want to find solution to everything in a peaceful way. And the Central Prosecution Office released a statement, said that whoever used the word peace will be prosecuted, because the word peace now is a tool used by terrorists. Even using this word is not danger. Let's talk about Gaza. It was issued everywhere on newspapers, even in writers' organization, whether should we call for ceasefire and finding a peaceful solution to conflict. Many countries denied to call for ceasefire. With PAN International, we officially released a statement we called for ceasefire. Many people criticized that. They said, you are using the language of politics. How can you then live in this world? You say, don't kill each other. Find a peaceful solution. The word ceasefire, the word peace, the word love. In Turkey, if you say love between men and men, or women and women, you are going to prison. So it is not about very high-ranking political terms. Every word in this life can be political. Are we going to defend our words, our language, or leave everything to those certain groups, politics, corporations? That's the question.
Because that is the question. Who decides what words are okay? And you mentioned corporations there at the end, which I think is really interesting in terms of their role in this whole debate. Before we kind of go to questions and open it out, let's just try and tackle that question of around social media and cancel culture and who's deciding what's okay and what's not okay. I mean, that's such a massive question to just kind of put to you, Tasneem, I know.
Sure, no, thanks, Peggy.
But have some thought. Let's have some thoughts on that.
It's impossible. I mean, there's not a person there's not a person around who hasn't in some way engaged with, to some extent, social media and a tech platform of sorts that would not have heard of or experienced some form of shadow banning or cancelling or having their account suspended or investigated or whatever, because we are again living at a time when your social media footprint has now got reach and is accessed by institutions that are invested in protecting a dominant narrative and invested in protecting a particular rhetoric. They not only fund it, but they protect the rhetoric in many cases of risk of saying it, a settler colonial narrative. And we're seeing that across the UK, across Australia and the US as well, that people who are critiquing atrocities or genocides will suddenly disappear from view, from accessibility, because the confidence with which they then assume a position of calling out human rights and injustices, which 20 years ago would have been fine, would have been supported, suddenly they're being silenced and clamped down upon. This level of intrusion and what I've heard it described as digital apartheid, where those who are espousing one particular view will not get traction. They will face consequences. But those who do not question and who maintain the status quo.
From your perspective, how much of that is about algorithm and about pushing out stuff that gets higher reach from the social media's company, and how much of that is about positioning decisions on the people who own social media or those decisions? We want people to hear that particular view and not hear that particular view.
I think they're inherently linked. So your algorithms and the positionality of what goes out in the public domain is part of what, I guess, empire, to some extent, to a large extent, is wanting to preserve. So if you are questioning the status quo, if you're questioning equality and freedom of expression and choice and rights and government decision, that's not in the interests. That's not in the interests of empire. Then you will be silenced. But if you are going to dumb down a nation and talk about anything else that is, I've done this. I'm not sure if others have done this. I've tested my algorithms on my Instagram, for example, and if I want to share even the most innocuous, I think, political thought, for example, something on gender equity or anti-racism, I'll get no traction. But if I put up a photo of my cat, what I had for breakfast, suddenly a lot of attention.
But how much of that is just down to the algorithm that actually the world wants to see your cat more than it wants to hear?
I think the algorithms have been colonized.
Yeah. Now, Elon Musk once said, how are they going to make decision about what to be spoken on Twitter or what not? He said, the only criteria is law. Then I said,
only criteria is
law.
Law.
I said, which law? Now they are banning the opposition accounts in Turkey every day. You are famous, or let's say you are very popular, let's say city mayor elected, you are criticizing government. Next day your Twitter account closed down because a court make a decision. They said you are dangerous and the decision to close down. And Twitter Center says that we have to follow the court decision of that country because that's the agreement they had. So in the end, the law is being driven by the government, by the fascist politics, and they decide on everything. And these big corporations of social media companies, they are quite happy because with that kind of things, then they see new arguments, new fights, and so new people come and they make more money. They are not losing anything. When we kill each other, they benefit from our blood, from our tears, from our sweat. We think that, okay, we are managing, we are trying to broaden the land for freedom, but they're broadening the land for their profit. In the end, it's a company. We call it social media. It's not social media. It's a company. They're based on profit. We know that. We are trying to turn it into something else, but in the last 10 years, we see that it's not a straightforward work. Now, this is an interesting phenomenon for humanity because social media is something new. No one in this room, when they were born, there was any cell phone in this world. You know, when I got my first cell phone, I was about 30 years old. I was a lawyer. Even there was not any social media yet. 10 years later came other things. End of 18th century, beginning of 19th century, so many people, intellectuals, had the same confusing feeling about newspapers. They hated it. Even Baudelaire in France, he never read newspapers. Once in his diary, he said, "Oh, this morning, accidentally, I saw a newspaper. I had a miserable day." You know, this is the feeling. But after decades, then humanity or civilization and came to a point to adapt these newspapers, find a medium. With social media, with artificial intelligence, with those smartphones, we are very new. We are still struggling. We are trying to understand them. I hope the next generation will find a better solution and will do better than we are doing at the moment. But we should warn them. They said, don't trust these companies. Okay, don't leave your decisions to them. Okay, find a way to make decision for yourself. I don't know how, but we should think about this question collectively, all together.
It's interesting. I mean, obviously, we hear a lot about X and about Musk's involvement in X and the algorithms, his direct involvement in all of that. But I recently read Careless People. Has anybody read it? The book, the expose of Facebook, and it's an absolutely fascinating read. And obviously, they tried to stop it being published, but what she argues, it's interesting what you said. What she argues in there. I mean, she worked very high up in Facebook for many years. What the writer argues is that effectively that the leadership of Facebook is almost amoral. And I don't mean in that they made no moral decisions is what she's saying. Their only decisions were based on what would make Facebook grow. So it wasn't like they were on a political agenda or and in fact, they would say, we don't understand politics and we don't care about politics. All we're interested in is, can we do it? And how does this make Facebook grow? And no thought of consequence. So that's what she argues in that book. So that's kind of interesting from what you were saying there. Let's open it out to some questions. Who would? Yeah, please do.
Just one. I'll comment on that issue of what you say in relation to the Facebook analogy. This idea that I just want to do what's popular and what people want. I look at something as honestly as impactful as, say, the marches that we've been seeing around the world the last 18 months. We're talking about tens of millions of people here en masse when you add up the number of people who have fronted up weekly. I know in Australia, weekly, there have been marches and rallies in support of what's happening in Gaza. And then I look at the UK and I look at the US. Don't tell me there's not a lot of public interest invested in calling this out and preventing governments from enabling and supporting continued armed support for furthering and enabling the genocide. We are seeing, even when polls have been taken, independent polls, the majority of public opinion is not in support of what governments are doing. So this idea that we're doing what the public wants, again, I think it's bait. I don't believe in any way that it can be validated. It's certainly not evidenced in polls that will show the overwhelming support is pro-peace and not pro-violence.
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. And you go on, and most weekends on Saturdays, you'll see, as you say, demonstrations all over the world. If your algorithm push that to you, of course.
Will never get pushed because they never get televised.
No.
And that again speaks to the editorial decisions that are made in the interest of protecting and preserving empire. So everything is linked. And even naming that becomes problematic because you've put that out there, and the costs are high because any which way you go, it's like that whack-a-mole. Every time you knock something on the head, something else pops up, and you say, well, what about what the people are saying? Bang. What about the number of people that have been unfairly arrested? Bang. What about the people who've lost their jobs? Bang. Just don't say boo about what's going on. Just keep smiling and post pictures about cats. Really, that's what they want.
Who would like to ask a question? So here, first hand up was here, and then we'll come to you.
There is a question at the end of this, I promise. You seem to be inhabiting a different world from me, but I think the popularist idea is the Trump and Israel narrative. Because in the UK, I can see a time, not too distant future, when moderate conservatism is extinct. It could be because I am a Mancunian, and you're not allowed to be one there, actually.
I was going to say, dangerous talk around these parts.
So you can be one if you are in the Labour Party. You could, if you used to be in the army, you can be quite an extreme right winger. And if you were a binman, you can be a slightly right winger. But you all have to vote Labour. But there are three Liberal Democrats, or was it two? I can't remember. It may be different round here. I don't know. So that's one point. Islam, that's another weird one for me. It's a fascist ideology, but it votes Labour. It's misogynist and paedophilic, but charming people in it for some reason, I don't know. Trans in Manchester. There are hardly any genetic women in leadership positions in Manchester that I can detect. And yet they are complaining about being excluded. You mention one peep and you're a TERF. And yet there are no councillors, MPs, ministers, lecturers who aren't trans women. Please tell me if I'm wrong and show me one who aren't genetic women. So all those things haven't been possible to be said recently, and now they can. Could be that I'm mad, of course, but it could be that the atmosphere has got a bit more relaxed.
So has it got more relaxed?
No, actually, the question was completely different. Do you agree with people moving to Blue Sky from Twitter?
Okay.
But
there's also that question, has it got more relaxed? And the question about Blue Sky over to Twitter.
Yeah, there was a lot there to unpack. I've moved over to Blue Sky, but I don't use it as much. So I was on Twitter for the longest time. In terms of the other issues that you spoke of your personal particular, how you're invested in the particular responses to those issues. I mean, they're your views to hold, and I understand that. I don't agree with most of them. In my opinion, the silencing of minority voices is part of what fundamentally has led to a repression of free speech and safety for communities. And I am going to read this statement out because I think it's... So freedom of expression is not a euphemism for hate speech. I think that's very, very important. I think it's fundamentally about protecting the well-being and rights of all of us. But all of us don't often get included. We're not often at the table. We are spoken about but not spoken to. And in particular, I think your comments about Islam being misogynistic and pedophilic in nature, to me, in many ways, represents the kind of narrative that has been brandied about in understanding a religion by not actually co-opting voices from that religion. So I would argue that that's certainly not my experience as a Muslim woman. It's certainly not the experience of any Muslims people that I know who have a platform, who are able to amplify their voices, who get spoken to and not spoken about. I think that's very fundamental. I also want to argue that freedom of expression and what gets called cancel culture is often just consequences. When you are called out for being racist or being sexist and told, well, I can't say anything now because I just got cancelled. Yes, you will get cancelled because saying something sexist or racist is not cool. It's not progressive. We don't have to hold space for people who have views that may not be affecting them, but certainly by allowing them to flourish are actually engendering harm and violence to other communities. Here it is. Freedom of speech without freedom from systemic violence is performative. So if we're going to say that you can say what you like, and we're not going to allow people to say exactly who they are and what they want to be, because if we do, we are going to get bottled and sidelined and possibly imprisoned. So genuine free speech, genuinely being able to hold a mic and say, this is what I believe, shouldn't come at the cost of imprisonment, unless what I say, if my right to defend my identity is making somebody else feel unsafe, I think that's a red line. But if it's not, there's no room for, I think, curtailing and suppressing of voices.
Thank you. Thanks. Did you want to add anything, Behan?
No, more questions.
Yeah. Do you want?
Yes.
Well, the bloke in front of you had his hand up earlier on, if that's okay.
Hang on.
Thanks for finishing with hope, actually. That was absolutely brilliant because millions of people marched
for peace and for Palestinian rights. That is, I think, is a hope for us. That is absolutely important. But another thing is, it's obvious that acceptable racism is Islamophobia now. As you see now, just the people just targeting Muslim and Islam, not a race. But being Muslim has been racialized last 30 years. And it is coming from the wars against Iran, Afghanistan, Iraq. It's just justified because those people's religion. And the genocide in Gaza is being justified by the Zionist Israeli state, but saying we are spreading democracy over there. Of course, this is a different discussion, but it needs to be challenged, I think. Islamophobia is racism. And it is a racism.
Absolutely.
It is a racism. My question...
in my experience as a Muslim woman, which I could comfortably say you don't have, racism branded out against me is hurtful, based on my faith, based on the way that I dress and what I believe. Simply for that reason, I can comfortably say, when I've experienced racism, you can't tell me. I'm sorry.
So
with all due respect,
I think we
that
have
I've
to hear
experienced racism.
We have to definitely hear what Tasneem's just said then, and we'll go with that.
By the way, I come from a Muslim country. I was brought up as a Muslim. I'm Kurdish, and thank you very much for inviting Burhan here as a Kurdish writer. But I wasn't going to make that comment after this Islamophobic comment I have to make. I haven't changed my actual comments. But I was going to ask, is it really, the problem is really with the liberal democracy? Because liberal democracy, or the Western liberal democracy, because when we look at the Western liberal democracy, it's been built upon colonialism, slavery, and racism. And we are talking about tolerance, actually, here. And in the Western democracy, we do have word tolerance. We tolerate you. And it is part of, it's the current education policy we have called promoting fundamental British values, which is part and parcel of anti-terrorism law, which was introduced after 2007 by Labour Party. Since 2007, 40,000 plus young people are criminalized by the state. It's called Prevent Strategy and De-Radicalization Program. And when we look at the Prevent Strategy, their main target is Muslim youth. The youngest one was 3 years old. A 3-year-old child was referred to police by the British schools to decriminalize.
Do you want to ask your question? Is that all right?
And the question is, can we really trust Western democracy?
Can we trust
Western democracy? And can we dismantle the master's house with master's tool?
Now, I think we have to see how democracy has been built in Europe and across the world. And we always see two different channels fighting each other and go alongside each other. Let's say one is big finance capital and let's say slavery or racism, but on the other hand, there is a struggle of public. 1979, French Revolution, 1848 revolutions across Europe, people's uprising, every decade in every country. It's not only some big forces governing and deciding the history of or the civilization of humanity. It's being made into different ways. We force each other, okay? Main forces say that, okay, we'll apply more oppressive tools, but public says, we want more freedom. Like, okay, do we want warfare or welfare? The simple question. They ask warfare because they make more profit. We want welfare. And this fight, this struggle always goes. In the end, we should trust the way how we struggle. That's why we need more unions. We need more student activism. We need women's activism. And every social group should be organized and raise their voice and demand their rights from the governments or from the institutions. If we don't do this, then yes, then they will decide. The finance and the slavery and all that profit-making companies that will make decision. That's why we have to trust the other side of Europe. When I go to, especially Central European countries, because I come from Turkey, they say, what do you think about Europe? Because I come from Middle East, I say, which Europe? There are two Europes. One is the Europe at the top, okay, working for the profit of big companies, but the other Europe I love If you go to London every 2 weeks, you will see 1 million people on the street calling for the freedom of people in Gaza. That's Europe too. It's not only the parliament. So which side of Europe we are going to support and to be part of?
Thank you, Burhan. Just to add to that, I would add, if ideally, if we talked about democratic institutions being authentically democratic, we would be talking about representation of minorities across the board who are seen as part of the greater whole. If you are a minority, that doesn't mean you don't get a voice. And unfortunately, that's what we're increasingly seeing. We're seeing not only that you do not have a voice, but if you dare to raise it, then you will be silenced, and often the most violent way. I think that, to me, the way that is now pivoting as the way democracy is progressing is very frightening.
Thank you, and thanks for that question.
Hello. I think we must make a distinction between violent or mocking speech and critical speech, particularly in the matter of religion. Now, I'm a Christian, and if Islam has been mocked in this country, Christianity has been mocked since my childhood by every third-rate comedian running out of ideas. So I know to be on the receiving end of it. Now, if I say to you, I don't like you because of your faith, I'm going to kill you, you're entitled to call the police. If I make insulting comments about your appearance, you're entitled to have me thrown out of the room. But if I say I'm subject to critical scrutiny, and it's the same with Christianity, it's the same with Judaism, and it's the same with Christianity, I've gone through the sources, and I am a history teacher, by the way, who has taught a lot of Muslims in Bradford and Jewish people as well in Manchester. But if I say I've gone through the sources, I've read all the texts, which I have. I read the Quran when I was age 15, I read the New Testament when I was 12, and I choose religion A because of, and I did not choose religion B because of. That's not hate speech.
So is that...
my argument is that religion should not be above criticism and scrutiny. But the one last question, and this is my question, is I've experienced cancellation from both the right and the left. And the arrogance I've encountered from the left, quite frankly, I think paved the way for the Trumps of this world, could pave the way for reform in this country. So I think, do you not think that in this country, probably elsewhere in the West, that the arrogance of the left with their cancel culture has fed the Trumps of this world?
So there's a couple of questions there. One, that question about the arrogance of the left, but also that question about how do we maintain critical scrutiny whilst also making sure, I think you talked earlier, Tasneem, about feeling unsafe is a red line that we cannot cross, whilst making sure that we are not letting anyone feel unsafe and that we are not crossing that line.
I guess if we're talking about, if people are going to hold views and the claim that they had the entitlement and right to their view, but if that view directly threatens the well-being and life of somebody, for me, that is a red line. I should point out that I think respect and inclusion of all faiths is an essential tenet to all the Abrahamic faiths, or faiths in general. And I would be the first to defend criticism of Christianity and Judaism as I see it. I think that's absolutely abhorrent. Anti-Semitism there's no room for that. Offense to Christianity offends me as a Muslim, and then I'm the first person to say that. But if people's comments about in an Islamic phobic context are going to actually harm, and I have seen this because I have worked on projects and initiatives in Australia and related to the West, where Islamophobic comments, anti-Palestinian hate and anti-Arab hate have directly threatened the life and well-being of people who are visibly Muslim. How do I not call that out? How do I not call that out as a Muslim, as a human being? I mean, to me, these things there needs to be a red line, and the red line is people's safety and well-being.
Thank you. Is there anything else you wanted to add to that,
Yes.
Behan?
Now, this sensitive issue of religion, and I come from Turkey, a Muslim country. I was raised with traditional madrasa religious education. Then I converted to atheism. Now I call myself atheist, but I never insult a religious belief, Islam or Christianity or Judaism. When people say Jewish people kill Muslim in Gaza, I say no, Israeli army killing people of Gaza. Don't blame a religion. I don't say that every religion is clear, everything is pure. Everything, when we look at from the language of politics, has again two dimensions. In Islam or in Judaism or Christianity or in anything, you will find good things and bad things. The question for you as a believer, which side you are going to promote? Okay? Are you going to discriminate women or other, let's say, part of society? Or the other call in the same religious text saying that be fair and equal and good to everyone. I believe in every religion there are good parts if you practice that side. Then let's encourage people. I don't say people that, hey, look, come and believe like me. I say, believe whatever you believe in, but in a positive way. Okay? Try to build a world with your neighbor who has a different belief. I never accuse a Muslim or a Jewish or a Christian anyway. And they shouldn't blame me or accuse me for my non-belief. Otherwise, we cannot build this world. That means that we will keep murdering each other, claiming that my belief is the best one, yours is the worst. That's the end of the world. This is what will be the real catastrophe.
Thank you.
It's about freedom, talking about freedom of expression, and I'm surprised nothing's been mentioned about the pandemic. I was against the lockdowns, and there were many doctors and academics who were also against the lockdowns, but they could not get their voice heard in the mainstream media at all. Not a peep, nothing. And we were demonised, and we had to meet up really in the bandstands of parks on Sunday mornings to give each other support, because the UN guidance on pandemics, it was just being completely ignored. Sweden was the only one that followed that. There was no need for lockdowns at all.
So, so is the question that what I'm gonna do now?
No, but they're still doing it. The point is, there's loads and loads now of studies coming out all over the world about the massive harm that happened with the vaccines because they weren't tested. But are they appearing in mainstream media? Absolutely not.
Okay,
The government doesn't want to be.
What we'll do is on specific issues like this, because I don't want this to get into a discussion about specific issues.
No,
and
it's about how
but
those
it is
voices.
about the media. Okay, so that's how we're going to reframe those questions. Let's
there's no
talk
freedom
about
of
that.
expression about the vaccines or the
That's the
lockdown.
question. That's the question. I think the question is there about the mainstream media. Is it picking certain voices that it wants to hear? Is really that question. Is it kind of taking narratives and saying we're only going to go with that? Or is it the question, because one of the things, I'm not speaking here for the BBC at all, but one of the things the BBC will say is that on a particular argument, they will get the same complaints from both sides of the argument that their voice isn't being heard. So let's talk about that question about mainstream media and what gets covered and what doesn't get covered and what voices get heard and what voices don't get heard.
Well, that's a big one. And I know there was a report about the BBC's balance. I think it was released last week. And from memory, I don't have the source of that, but I do recall reading about that. Its coverage on Gaza specifically overwhelmingly preferenced the voices from a pro-Israel perspective, as opposed to, there was no journalistic balance essentially, and the numbers were actually quite staggering in terms of the proportionality of coverage, in terms of whose voices and narrative were privileged and whose were silenced. I think it was very damaging, to the credibility of the BBC. And I say this on the back of a finding within Australia last week on Thursday, where a finding was handed down, a precedent finding, that the ABC, Australian national broadcaster, was found guilty of sacking a on-air radio host who was filling a 5-day gig. 3 days into a 5-day gig, she was removed from her post because, and as the judge actually articulated in his summary findings, stated the executive management, the board level of the national broadcaster succumbed to pressure from a pro-Israel lobby to have her removed because they didn't like the tone of her social media.
So do you think, going back, and because obviously there are lots of different issues that could be part of this question.
My point being that broadcasters do listen to certain voices and are influenced by certain groups, no doubt. And so what we get then here and what we get seen, and in this particular case, is a particularly sanitized view or a compromised view of issues. We're not getting a balanced perspective and narrative.
Do you think that was the case with COVID then? with the lockdowns.
Potentially, absolutely. We didn't maybe get that, but I think with COVID, it was new terrain for the world at large. And then how it was manifest was in terms of media consumption was how much the health lobbies in different countries had sway with politics. In some countries, it was more than others.
Do you want to add to that, Behan?
No, we can have more questions when 8 minutes left.
Okay, so I just wanted to ask, as one of the probably younger people in the room, about how this kind of newer generation of people, this young generation, are going to try and advocate for free speech and kind of advocate for getting these unheard voices into the more public sphere.
Have you got some thoughts yourself about that?
Yeah, I'm a young adopted person, and so I don't believe that I am heard by my council. I don't believe I'm heard by social services. I've got friends that I listen to from marginalised communities, and I think you're not being heard. And I want to be able to advocate for you and bring your voice into the world and get people to listen to you. And I just don't know how to do that best.
Even with social media and even
Especially
with those...
with social media.
What, because you can put stuff out there, but it's not being heard,
Well,
is that...
I suppose it's a reluctance to post on social media because of my age and due to my background. I don't particularly want people responding to me and talking to me online. But I can imagine a lot of young people that do post online don't get listened to, they don't get taken seriously. They're just those young liberal people that just talk nonsense on the internet. And so I suppose, how do we get past these barriers?
So I think that's really, there's a few really interesting questions in there. One, how do particular groups of people who aren't feeling heard get past those barriers? But there's also another question I think that you raised there, which is a really interesting question, which is about almost like that personal question of people being able to take the grief on social media if they do speak out and being able to feel like you can do that. So the platform's there, but actually are people who have maybe unheard views able to do that because of the backlash and the pylons and things that can come? So a few issues there. Who's going to kick off?
I think now you are doing what you want to do. You came here and in a big group, you speak and you raise your question. That's the point to start. A few simple things to generalize, There's not a secret formula here. Organize with your friends, in your environment, and to try to be affiliated with bigger organizations like follow Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, or other, organizations that doing good for everyone, not only for certain groups, okay? Then you will see how they interpret things, the current political events across the world. That kind of things helps. When I get up in the morning, I see some news on the newspaper. I don't understand, then I go on some trusted websites. Not only my organization, but let's say Amnesty International, Article 19, Human Rights Watch, that kind. I trust them first. And then I go to the other sources, and then I speak with my friends, with my, other people in my environment, and try to do something, first myself, and then with other people. I think your generation can do it, better than us.
Can I just add to that? I think what you're doing is fantastic, and keep on doing it. Absolutely. I think the ability to include voices that are led by people who've got specific lived experience on a specific perspective is essential, because it comes back to the idea of, we don't want to talk about you. We want you to talk for yourself. And I think you need to lead that. And it can be isolating and it can be frustrating, but be persistent. Be so persistent that you're always there, that eventually you wear them down and they have to listen to you. I really believe in the strength of persistence. I also think find your own media platform. That's what Substack exists for. Develop your own podcast, develop your own network. And if you're going to get silenced on the Facebooks of this world, or the Instagrams of this world, that's why other opportunities exist, and use them. And again, I with young people that I interact with, I'd be saying, even if you wanted to write a paragraph or half a page or a long form article, put your voice out there, put your perspective out there, develop a body of work, develop your commentary. So when people say, "Oh, who is that Jane?" Go and say, "Well, look, this is Jane's podcast. Look, this is Jane's information." Develop a presence for yourself, develop a narrative for yourself, because your voice does matter. And while you probably do feel justifiably isolated and maybe frustrated with the status quo that puts you in the radical young voice. Be there for so long that in 5 and 10 years' time, you have a repository of amazing work that you've created. You've built up a brand for yourself, right? And on the way, other people have been motivated by what you're doing. So don't underestimate the power of a single voice. I know that's a cliched saying, but it's actually true. And some of the best ideas have come about from people being persistent in their voice and not being scared into silence and being told to shut themselves down. So don't do that.
Another question? One more. Who would like to, give
a really easy question would be nice. A really easy one.
Yeah, it's an easy topic though, is it? That's the challenge.
Do I like Bradford or something else? I do.
Yeah. We haven't got any more questions. Okay, we've got one at the end, one at the back. Yeah.
Sorry?
What do you want for lunch?
Oh, a salad would be great. Yeah, thanks.
I think in the green room we're getting curry for lunch. Yeah, which is always the Bradford way. So I'm just going to finish off then with asking a question. I think it follows on really nicely from what you were just saying, Tasneem, and obviously that was appreciated by people in the room. And it was something you said right at the beginning as well, Burhan. You were saying, what do we do about this? What do we do? And obviously you were talking there about making your own media, making your own content. Is there any other advice, suggestions that you can give us? Is just being brave part of it? What's the rest of the other things you'd say around what we can do on this?
Oh, these kind of questions are the worst ones. Seriously, because there is no straight answer, and also it's very arrogant to answer this, because I'm sitting here and I will give you ideas how to resist or struggle. Why should I tell you something? What's the difference between this stage and this part of the room? We should say that there's no difference here. First, we have to think about this. All together, what can we do? The only advice is the practice that you are doing yourself. For example, people say in interviews, journalists must say, what is your call for new generation? I have no call for new generation. My call is my practice. Until this age, what I had done, what I've achieved, and what I missed. That's my message to new generation. I write books. I faced prison. I survived, let's say, assassination attempt. I lived in exile. That's my advice. Don't be scared of anything.
Wow. Don't be scared of anything.
Of course, I'm not saying that put yourself in danger. In PEN International, we have 130 county centers across the world. In Britain, we have 3. English Center, PEN Wales, Cymru, and Scottish PEN. And in China, in Russia, in Turkey, everywhere we have PEN centers. When there is a serious issue in that country, our advice to our colleagues there, we say, don't do anything. Don't put yourself in danger. We, the international writers, will do it for you. Your safety is my priority. Of course, I don't think the same thing about myself. I go directly. That's my practice. That's my advice to everyone. So many people died. Nobel laureate Ales Bialiatski from Belarus, arrested 3 years ago, then received Nobel Peace Prize, still in prison serving 10 years. In Myanmar 2 years ago, a writer, a young singer called Jimmy, was executed by lawful court order. This is the world happening in this century, 21st century. People are facing dreadful things. Only in Gaza, 24 writers murdered. More than 80 journalists were murdered. More than 100 United Nations staff members murdered. This is happening in this century, and we are hearing, witnessing everything. We should do something. There are lots of things to do. We should do something.
Thank you, Burhan. Now, all I can really add to that is global seismic change is beyond the scope immediately of any one of us individually. I appreciate that, but maybe start with the micro. And we've all got that difficult auntie or uncle on Facebook, on WhatsApp groups, who always comes up with a comment that you sort of think, oh my gosh, what am I going to say to them at Christmas time or dinner time or Sunday lunch or something? Start with having conversations where you can, with circles where you can influence change. Because that is, I do believe that generates greater change. There is a ripple effect in engaging with people who have a different view to you. In fact, I think it's important. I think if we only remain within our echo chambers of conversation and thought, we don't necessarily affect change. So where it is safe and where it is impactful, try to enter spaces and conversations that challenge the status quo and challenge, I guess, empire in a broad term, where the suppression of minority voices is considered necessary and important. I think that is, for me, that's my little bugbear. And I try to take that idea and that ability to gently and diplomatically and always kindly question that kind of oppression. Because to me, it sounds ironic to kind of question oppression, but sometimes that's what it takes to do it in a safe and impactful way. Yeah, so go forth, but go safely.
Thank you. So we have actually come to the end now. In fact, we're 3 minutes over now. So I think that's a good place to finish. I mean, we've done something. We've done our little bit today because we're here and we're discussing it. So, and I like that. Go kindly, go respectfully, and make sure we're not crossing red lines, but we are critiquing and we are discussing and we're doing all those things. Once again, can you please give a big round of applause for our panel? And enjoy the rest of the festival, everyone.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of the Explore Words, Discover Worlds podcast with Bradford Literature Festival. If you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to help support the podcast, please subscribe, share this episode with others and leave a rating. Mark your calendars for the return of Bradford Literature Festival, Friday the 3rd to Sunday the 12th of July 2026.